Right. So today we're really going to get into it. We're looking at the Quran,
Okay.
specifically Jews 2, verses 142 through 24:7.
Right.
And this section is huge. It's about some really important changes in Islamic practice and belief.
Yeah, you said it.
We're talking about the Qibla.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the direction Muslims face when they pray,
Right.
changing from Jerusalem to Mecca.
Big change.
Just imagine the questions that must have come up.
Oh, I bet.
You know, the need to understand why this change is happening.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, right? This wasn't like just picking a new direction.
Right.
These verses show it was about aligning yourself with divine guidance,
I see.
even when it meant, challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about those times when you've had to make a big shift,
Yeah.
reorient yourself, even when it was uncomfortable.
Totally. We all have those moments, I think,
Right.
where like our internal compass kind of gets recalibrated.
Exactly.
So this change in direction, I mean, it caused a lot of discussion, even resistance. And the verses mention this concept of a median community.
Yes.
What does that even mean in this context?
So the median community, it's not really about a physical location.
Okay.
It's more about the Muslim community being balanced,
Okay.
just being a witness to truth and a model for ethical behavior.
Interesting.
It's a huge responsibility,
Wow.
this idea of being witnesses for all of humanity, not just for yourself.
So it's like living your faith in a way that it goes outward.
Yeah.
And impacts the world around you.
Exactly.
Makes me think about that ripple effect of our actions.
For sure.
Trying to be ethical can inspire others.
Yeah, it's about recognizing our actions have these consequences.
Right.
And by really living these values of balance and justice and compassion,
Yeah.
Muslims can contribute to a world that's more just and equitable for everybody.
It's a beautiful concept, really.
It is.
It's this connection between faith and action.
Yeah.
But the Quran doesn't stop at these big ideas.
No, it doesn't.
It gives very specific guidance on daily practices.
It does.
Like prayer, fasting, charity, all those things are touched on here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those are considered like the core pillars of Islamic faith.
Mm-hmm.
And these verses, they give us deeper insight into how important they are and how we should approach them.
Let's break those down a bit. Starting with fasting.
Okay.
One thing that stood out to me, it mentions that fasting wasn't just for Muslims,
Right.
but for people before them as well.
Mhm.
Who's that referring to?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It speaks to the idea that there's this shared spiritual lineage.
Okay.
Like Islam recognizes and honors all the prophets and revelations that came before it.
I see.
It doesn't name specific communities,
Yeah.
but it suggests this kind of continuity of spiritual practice,
Interesting.
this recognition that trying to connect with God
Yeah.
that transcends any one time or place.
So it's like a common thread
Yeah,
that connects all these different faiths and traditions.
it is.
Throughout history, this shared longing to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly.
Like the divine.
Precisely. And within Islam fasting, particularly during Ramadan,
Yes.
it takes on these really profound spiritual and social dimensions.
Ramadan. It's about so much more than just not eating and drinking right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're right on. The Quran really emphasizes how transformative this month can be,
Yeah.
how it can help you grow spiritually and build self-discipline,
Right.
and even empathy for people who are less fortunate.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with yourself
Mm-hmm.
and strengthening your connection with God through prayer and reflection and acts of service.
And that idea of service that brings us to charity, another big topic in these verses, we see specific instructions about zakah, which is one of the pillars of Islam requiring Muslims to give a portion of their wealth to those in need.
Mm-hmm.
What strikes you about the groups that are prioritized as recipients of this charity?
Well, it's interesting. These verses, they highlight the most vulnerable people in society.
Right.
So the Quran mentions relatives, orphans, those who are struggling travelers,
Yeah.
those who need a helping hand.
Yeah.
It's really about social responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's woven into the very fabric of the faith.
Yeah.
It's a safety net for the people who are at risk of falling through the cracks.
It sounds like a blueprint for a more compassionate and just society.
Exactly.
One where everyone's needs are met.
Yeah.
And this idea of giving back to those less fortunate, it's not limited to zakah.
Right.
The Quran also talks about voluntary charity sadaqah.
Mm.
And it uses this really intriguing phrase, loaning to Allah.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It's not your typical financial transaction.
It's a powerful metaphor.
Right.
It changes how we think about giving.
Okay.
It's like an investment
Okay.
with guaranteed returns. Not material returns, but spiritual growth and divine reward.
I see.
It reminds us that everything we have ultimately belongs to God.
Right.
And giving back is showing gratitude and trust.
So true wealth isn't about what we have, but what we give.
The
Right.
impact we make on others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this idea of reward in Islam, it's not just about the afterlife.
Okay.
The Quran says that doing the right thing brings blessings and contentment in this life, too.
So it's about living in line with our values.
Precise.
It's a powerful reminder that faith isn't just about rituals.
No, it's not.
It's about how we treat each other,
Absolutely.
about compassion and generosity in our everyday lives.
Exactly. And this leads us to another important theme in these verses,
Okay.
facing difficulties with faith and resilience.
Because life's not always easy.
It's not.
There's this one verse that's really powerful. It talks about those who fear death being told to die.
It's intense.
It is.
Yeah.
What's the meaning behind that?
I think it's about perspective.
Okay.
We get so caught up in fearing the inevitable.
Right.
Death. Exactly. But true faith is about surrendering to God's plan,
Yeah.
knowing that this life is temporary.
Right.
It's not literally telling people to die.
Right.
It's about getting over that fear of death by living a life that matters. So accepting that we're mortal, but not with despair,
Right.
but in a way that frees us to live more fully now.
Yeah. And that acceptance helps us face challenges with courage and resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Life is going to have its ups and downs.
Always.
But even in those tough times, there's hope.
Mm-hmm.
We can always turn to God for strength.
It's comforting knowing we're not alone,
It is.
that there's something bigger we can turn to for guidance.
For sure. And this brings us to a sensitive but really important topic.
Okay.
The idea of fighting in Islam.
Right.
These verses are often misunderstood.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand the context.
Right. These verses can seem like they clash with the messages of peace and compassion.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile those two things?
Well, we have to remember the historical context.
Right.
These verses were revealed when early Muslims were being persecuted and oppressed.
Okay.
This wasn't about starting fights or gaining power or land.
Okay.
It was about defending themselves and their faith.
Hmm.
It was about protecting the right to religious freedom.
So it's about self-defense, not about being aggressive.
Yeah. And even then, even when defending yourself, the Quran sets really clear rules,
Okay.
like no fighting during sacred months
Interesting.
and never going beyond what's necessary and
Mhm.
always showing mercy if the enemy backs down.
Showing mercy, even in that situation.
It's about recognizing the sanctity of life.
That's powerful. It's not about encouraging violence at all.
Yeah.
It's more like a framework for engaging in conflict in a way that's still just,
Exactly.
even under the most difficult circumstances.
They've got these verses, they offer this really nuanced perspective on a complicated topic.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in self-defense, we have to act with restraint and compassion.
Right.
Always try to find a peaceful solution first.
Only fight as a last resort.
Exactly.
It's a really relevant message.
It is.
Especially now when there's so much conflict in the world.
It makes you think.
It does. It makes you think about how we can be peacemakers.
Yes.
How we can work for justice and compassion.
Even when things are difficult.
Okay, shifting gears a bit.
Okay.
These verses also talk about family life,
Yeah,
marriage, divorce, remarriage. There's a lot of detail there.
there is.
Why is this such an important topic?
Well, in Islam, marriage, it's sacred. It's the bedrock of society.
Okay,
You don't just jump into it
Right.
or break it off easily.
right.
So these verses, they provide these specific guidelines to make sure things are done fairly and with order,
I see.
because it can be really hard emotionally.
Of course. Especially if kids are involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about making sure everyone's rights and well-being are protected.
So it's more than just the legal side of things.
It is.
It's about promoting understanding and responsible behavior,
Yeah,
trying to reconcile whenever possible.
absolutely. The Quran recognizes that relationships are complex.
Mm-hmm.
And while divorce is allowed,
Right.
it really should be the last resort.
Okay.
The goal is to try to keep families together,
Yeah.
to encourage couples to really talk and work things out.
Communication is so important.
It is. And patience and compassion.
It's a reminder that relationships take work,
They do.
but they're worth it.
They are, for everyone involved.
Absolutely. There's one last verse I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
It says that you shouldn't marry a polytheist until they believe.
Right. That one sometimes causes some confusion.
Yeah. Is it about forcing someone to convert?
Not at all.
Yeah.
The Quran is crystal clear about religious freedom.
Okay.
No one should be forced to change their beliefs.
Okay.
But this verse, you have to understand it in its context.
Yeah,
It's emphasizing how important shared faith is in a marriage,
I see.
especially back then when the Muslim community was still developing.
So it's not about imposing your beliefs,
No,
but finding someone who shares your values.
exactly. And that's something that goes beyond religion, too.
Mm-hmm.
It's about that universal desire to connect with someone who gets you.
Who understands your spiritual journey.
Yes, someone you can build a life with.
It makes you think about how important communication is in any relationship, no matter what your beliefs are.
Being open and honest, finding that common ground.
That's how you build something strong.
Absolutely.
Well, we've really gone up today.
We have.
Divine guidance, social responsibility, personal growth, strong relationships.
It's amazing how these verses from so long ago
I know.
still speak to us today.
They really do. They remind us that Islam is about every part of life.
Yes.
It's about our relationship with God, how we treat each other, how we live our lives.
Our responsibilities to each other.
It's about striving to be better.
And to live with purpose.
Yes, grounded in justice and compassion and serving others.
Exactly. And you know what I think is so important?
What's that?
That verse 213 that says, we were all one community once.
Before we were divided.
It's powerful. It reminds us to see past our differences.
To focus on what unites us.
We're all human.
What a beautiful message.
It is.
It gives me hope that we can build a better world together.
We can, if we approach each other with empathy and understanding.
The willingness to listen.
Exactly. So until next time, keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and keep diving deeper into the wisdom that's all around us.
And within ourselves.